He said I'm not family, so I took his inheritance. He said I'm not family. You're not real family, so don't expect a dime. Those were my brother Dean's first words to me at our father's funeral luncheon. Not condolences, not silence. Just that, straight to camera, no commercial break. I nearly dropped my plate of potato salad, which, given the context, was suddenly the most loyal thing in the room. And the man didn't even lower his voice. He said it like he was announcing a brunch special, then buttered his roll with the smugness of someone allergic to self-awareness. My brain blanked. My sarcasm did. Cool, I said, so I can stop pretending to like your girlfriend too. The room froze like it had entered emotional buffering mode. No one laughed, not even me. Aunt Linda audibly gasped, which for someone with a pacemaker was downright athletic. Inside, I was half shaking, half amused. Dean always pulled stunts like that, talking big, acting like everything revolved around him. But this time, we were talking about Dad's estate. The man had been gone 3 days, and Dean was already circling like a vulture with Wi-Fi access. Let me rewind about 30 seconds, because I swear he planned the timing. We've been standing around this rented church hall, wall-to-wall awkward sympathy hugs, everyone saying he's in a better place, like it was a script. Then Dean, drink in hand, leans in all casual. I talked to Dad's lawyer, he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. Just so you know, don't get your hopes up. I blinked. For what? The inheritance. His smirk widened. You're not really family anyway, you know that. I laughed. Partly because if I didn't, I'd scream. Explain that logic to me, Einstein. He shrugged, like I was too stupid to understand. You were the quiet one. The weird one. You don't even carry the family name anymore. Right. Because Dad's will could obviously be nullified by my legal choice to keep my sanity after divorce. Still, something about his confidence, it stuck with me. Not the insult. I'd heard worse from him growing up. It was the way he said it, almost rehearsed. Dean was never stupid enough to say something that specific without knowing something first. That night, after the guests cleared out and Mom went to bed, clutching one of Dad's old flannel shirts, I stared at the photos on the mantle. Dad fishing, Dad fixing the boat, Dad at every family barbecue rolling his eyes at Dean's business schemes. Every memory had the same flavor. Me quietly cleaning up after whatever catastrophe Dean had caused. If Dad left a will, I needed to see it before Dean twisted it into his next conquest. Because one thing was certain, if there was a loophole, Dean would find it and then trip into it wearing designer shoes. So yeah, that not family line hit hard, but not in the way he meant. It was like Dad's old saying suddenly made sense. Greed shows you what love hides. That night I made myself a silent promise. No, a vow. If Dean wanted to play games over Dad's legacy, fine. But he'd forgotten one small detail. When I keep quiet, it's not weakness. Act 1, the entitled brother and the family power play. Here's the thing about Dean. If charisma were currency, he'd be rich enough to buy shame. The guy could talk an insurance salesman into buying extended warranty on his own car. Growing up, he perfected this aura of effortless success, the kind that made our aunts say things like, that boy's going places. They were right. It's just that most of those places were financial disasters with mood lighting. Dean was the sort of sibling who could spill juice on the couch, blame me, and somehow get praised for his honesty. As adults, the pattern never really changed. He'd mess up, make it sound heroic, and I'd be the bad guy for noticing. I used to just stay quiet to keep peace, the unofficial family janitor, mopping up emotional spills while Dean strutted away wearing the victim crown. But silence gets expensive when inheritance enters the chat. A couple days after the funeral, Dean texted, "Let's keep things professional, okay? I'll coordinate with a lawyer. Too emotional for you, probably." Imagine the gall needed to write that on a phone still loaded with condolences. I didn't even reply. I just stared at it, half tempted to send him a fruit basket labeled professional enough to charge rent. Our dad wasn't some rich tycoon. He was a teacher, smart, practical, soft-spoken. What little he had came from 40 years of showing up early and leaving late. The main assets were threefold: The family house, a modest savings account, and the cabin at Lake Morin, where we spent every summer turning mosquito bites into childhood memories. The cabin wasn't worth much on paper, but emotionally, it was Dad's heartbeat. And I knew that cabin would become the battlefield. Because Dean never wanted the lake. He wanted control. He liked being the hero who took care of it all, meaning he stole the spotlight and the decision-making rights. The more people relied on him, the bigger his ego got. Dad used to say Dean could build a career out of collecting gratitude he didn't earn. I tried staying detached, really. Told myself, maybe he's dreaming weird. People say grief does funny things. Yeah, like turning your brother into a walking tax audit. A week later, Dad's lawyer called me directly. Your father left specific instructions about his will, he said, voice half curious, half cautious. My stomach did a little barrel roll. Specific instructions? That didn't sound like Dad's usual style. He was more of a keep it simple and label the leftovers type. The lawyer asked me to come by alone. Before I could even agree, Dean's name flashed on my phone again. Same number, same arrogance. Talk to Patterson, the lawyer. He's being dramatic. Don't waste your time. It's cut and dry stuff. Cut and dry? If Dean said that, it guaranteed hidden puddles. When someone lies to you often enough, you start hearing their tone more than their words. His "don't bother" translated to "I already bothered for both of us," which, translated further, meant I'm plotting. I sat on my couch that evening, scrolling through old voice messages Dad had left. Most were dull, reminders about oil changes, half-birthday jokes, the stuff you delete too quickly until you wish you hadn't. Then I found one from 6 months ago. Hey kids, just wanted you to know, some things aren't meant to be split evenly. Fair doesn't always mean 50-50. My heart did that weird hiccup thing. He'd been planning something. He, meanwhile, was in full campaign mode, calling relatives, subtly announcing himself as executor material. My cousin Linda told me he'd ordered professional photos in a suit for the press release. The man was treating probate court like election season. I wanted to roll my eyes so hard they'd account for cardio, but the truth is, part of me was scared. Dean wasn't dumb. He was dangerous with confidence. And if Dadswell had any loose end, Dean would tug at it until it unraveled. Mom stayed neutral as always. Don't make waves, she said one night while folding the same dish towel for the third time. Your father wouldn't want fighting. Yeah, well, Dad also wouldn't want his life's work to fund Dean's next pyramid scheme. That's when my quiet habit snapped. For years, keeping peace felt mature. Suddenly, it felt like complicity. Dean was running an emotional monopoly, and I was the only one who still used cash. So I called the lawyer back, scheduled a meeting, and decided to stop pretending ignorance was serenity. If there was something hidden in that will, I was going to find out before Dean turned Dad's legacy into a LinkedIn post. The morning of the meeting, Dean texted again, "I'll pick you up. Keep optics good." I nearly laughed coffee through my nose. Optics? This wasn't Succession, it was Tuesday. I told him I'd drive myself. He sent back a thumbs up emoji, the universal sign for I'll act offended later. That drive to the lawyer's office felt weirdly calm. For the first time in forever, I wasn't acting like Dean's mistakes were my responsibility. The city passed by in a blur of car horns and chain coffee shops, and I caught myself smiling. It wasn't joy exactly, more like anticipation laced with caffeine and revenge potential. Dean thought he had this all figured out. He figured I'd surrender, like always, let him run the show while I waited to be told where to stand for the family photo. But this time was different. When Dad died, he left memories, not management roles. He taught me quiet doesn't mean weak. It means you're waiting for the right moment to speak. And lately, I've been feeling downright chatty. By the time I pulled into Patterson's parking lot, I wasn't just curious anymore. I was determined. This wasn't only about money or property. It was about flipping the script Dean had been directing my whole life. So when I walked through those glass doors and saw Dean already inside, wearing his overpriced grieving outfit and sipping complimentary water like an owed interest, I knew exactly what came next. If he wanted a power play, he'd picked the wrong silent sibling. Act 2, Dad's Will and the Hidden Clause. Walking into Patterson and Bell's office felt like stepping into a graveyard made of mahogany and bad news. The air even smelled expensive, somewhere between cologne and confidentiality. And of course, Dean was already there, leaning back in his chair like he just closed a billion-dollar deal in smirks. He greeted me with, "You finally made it. Traffic? Or were you practicing your surprised face?" I sat down and smiled sweetly. Neither. I was hoping you'd start without me, save the room some oxygen. The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, an older man whose glasses looked heavy enough to alter gravity, cleared his throat. "I'm glad both of you could make it. Your father was very clear about how he wanted this handled." He shuffled some papers with solemn efficiency, probably for dramatic effect. Dean leaned forward. "Cut to the chase, Mr. P. Dad said it was simple. 50-50 split, right?" I watched Patterson's eyebrow twitch, a micro-expression straight out of a courtroom drama. "The will is straightforward," he began. "Your father left his estate to be divided evenly between his two children, his home, savings, and personal effects. However," he paused, glancing at the thick envelope in front of him, "there's also something additional." Dean's smirk returned immediately. Here we go. Let me guess. Some sentimental letter for a scrapbook keeper here." He jerked his thumb at me. I didn't bite. I had learned years ago that reacting to Dean was like feeding a raccoon. Once you start, it never stops coming back. Patterson ignored the jab and continued. "Your father left a sealed letter labeled only to be opened by Dean and my name together, in the presence of his attorney. He gave no explanation beyond that." Dean tilted his head. "A letter? That's dramatic." "Fine, open it." But Patterson shook his head. "You open it." Dean rolled his eyes, shredded the fancy wax seal like it insulted him personally, and unfolded the pages. For a man who claimed to hate melodrama, he sure read aloud like he was auditioning for one. "To my kids, if you're reading this, then I've managed to make this awkward even after death. Sorry about that." I couldn't help smiling. That was Dad's humor, apologetic mischief with a side of dad joke. Dean skimmed ahead impatiently. "I want you both to know I'm proud of you, but I've added one final lesson to this process." His voice slowed slightly. "There are conditions known only to me. These conditions determine who receives what, based not on need or name, but on character." He frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" Patterson looked unbothered. "Your father didn't elaborate. He insisted the instructions would reveal themselves in time." Dean barked a laugh. "So we're in a treasure hunt now? Great. Maybe he hid the savings account under the cabin floorboards. Classic." I stayed quiet, but my stomach was doing gymnastics. Conditions known only to him sounded exactly like something my father would do. He believed fairness wasn't math, it was morality. And morality was Dean's least studied subject. The will reading continued like a polite war. Every time Patterson mentioned something mundane, a watch, a set of fishing rods, Dean found a way to twist his face into disappointment or entitlement. "That rod was basically mine anyway," he'd mutter. Or, "I'm sure Dad wanted me to have the house. I'm the responsible one." Sure, if responsible meant once refinancing a car to fund a crypto mining fail. I just nodded occasionally, mentally cataloging every smug word for future use. Patterson kept addressing both of us equally, but I could feel the weight in his phrasing. My Cuban briefs to keep an eye on Dean. When it was over, Patterson slid the papers across the table. "Everything is set to be processed within 60 days, he said. However, there is a clause regarding early transfers. Neither party may attempt to liquidate or alter any assets before final authorization. Breach of that will invalidate distribution." Dean feigned offense. "Breach? You think I try to mess with my dad's legacy?" Patterson's lips barely twitched. "Experience suggests clarity prevents confusion." Dean grabbed his jacket. "Fine. I've got meetings. Same results with less theatrics, please." He left in typical fashion, door lingering open, confidence trailing like cheap cologne. I stayed seated. Patterson leaned forward. Your father asked me not to disclose details about one additional document, he said quietly. But, off the record, if you find something in his personal effects labeled for you, it might clarify his intentions. He handed me a simple business card. For the record, I didn't encourage any independent searching, he added, which of course was lawyer speak for go look. Driving home, my brain looped the phrase, conditions known to me alone. That wasn't random. Dad didn't do verdict unless there was a purpose, usually immoral, sometimes mischievous. He once turned a lost remote into a lesson on patience. There was no way this note wasn't something deliberate. Dean, predictably, treated it as a loophole to exploit. He was already texting me halfway home, we should meet tomorrow. Streamline stuff. Patterson moved slow. Dad would hate that. Translation, let's find a shortcut before anyone notices I'm planning one. I typed back something non-committal like, sure, let's talk soon, then blocks and snoozed him for 24 hours. Sometimes peace of mind is just muting stupidity. That evening, I dug out Dad's old files, brown paper folders, neatly labeled, corners too sharp to be accidental. I flipped past tax returns, car, titles, little notes, written in a slanted teacher's handwriting. Somewhere between insurance receipts and cabin maintenance, found a smaller envelope marked with a single word, private. My pulse hiccuped again. The seal was old but intact. Inside, one sheet of paper, short and direct. If you're reading this, it means the will has been read. Trust integrity, not inheritance. Truth is the condition. That was it. 6 words, one clue, and a growing suspicion that Dean's downfall would be entirely self-inflicted. For the first time since the funeral, I laughed out loud. Not happy laughter, just the kind that bursts out when you realize fate's setting up a slow-motion comedy. Because if truth was the condition and greed the test, then Dean was about to fail spectacularly. I folded the note back neatly and placed it in a new folder labeled Future Satisfaction. Then I poured myself a drink and raised the glass toward the ceiling. Nice move, Dad, I said. Let's see how your favorite performs on the exam. Somewhere out there, Dean was probably drafting another email about partnership efficiency, unaware he'd just signed up for a loyalty test disguised as paperwork. And in that quiet moment, I felt it calm, sharp, inevitable. The real inheritance wasn't money or property. It was the gene for poetic justice. And I planned to use it. Act 3, memories, manipulation, and motives. The mind does this weird thing when you're angry. It starts playing reruns of all the moments that built the bridge to that exact frustration. So that night, sitting on my couch with Dad's cryptic note in my hands and Dean's arrogance still echoing in my head, I slipped straight down memory lane, no nostalgia, just highlights of humiliation. Dean's been performing his entire life. When we were kids, he charmed every adult in the room while quietly making sure I got blamed for any chaos behind the curtain. There was the infamous Christmas cookie incident. Dean convinced me to sneak one before dinner and told Mom I had eaten half the batch. He ended up with extra dessert for telling the truth. I got grounded for gluttony at age 6, or his teenage genius phase. He invented a science project that looked suspiciously like my design, right down to the spelling errors. He won. I got moral support credit. Mom framed his certificate. I got told to be proud. Dean's entire brand was taking credit, weaponized charm, and strategic puppy eyes. My dad caught onto his manipulative streak early, but unlike the rest of us, he approached it as a life lesson. You can't stop a liar by yelling, he'd tell me. You stop him by letting the truth do overtime. I never really understood what he meant until that day at the will reading. Now it felt like he'd written a syllabus titled Dean 101, the final exam. Everyone thought Dean was the golden child. Me, I was the quiet one, the sidekick in every family story. The irony was, I did most of the repair work, emotional and otherwise. When he blew his first major allowance on a business investment translation pyramid scheme with complimentary mugs, guess who quietly loaned him the difference before Dad found out? Me. And when he crashed Mom's car because he was texting someone named Not Important, guess who took the blame for leaving the garage door partially open? Yeah, Lady Me again. Years of that makes you numb in the moment, but bitter in the reruns. Watching him saunter through life, repeating the same patterns, it almost became amusing in a tragic comedy kind of way, like a soap opera villain who doesn't realize the camera zoomed in on his own downfall. There was this one birthday dinner, Dad's 65th. Dean gave a speech about family unity, choking up halfway like he was auditioning for Les Miserables. Everyone clapped. 10 minutes later, he asked Dad for a $10,000 bridge loan. I remember Dad's face going flat. He didn't even argue. Just said, "Dean, family doesn't need paperwork for love," which of course Dean interpreted as approved. Later that night, I found Dad sitting on the porch with a beer, staring at the lake. "He doesn't even realize he's failing tests no one gave him," he said quietly. I didn't get it then. Now, it felt like prophecy. The will wasn't random. It was Dad's final experiment. I think Dad knew I'd find that note. He always claimed I was the only one who actually read instructions. He also loved puzzles that looked like messes until you noticed the pattern. So the conditions known to me alone wasn't some riddle for his amusement. It was one last shot at measuring who his sons had become when no one was grading anymore. Still, the pettier part of me wanted cosmic payback. Because let's be honest, moral lessons are great, but vengeance with good lighting? Even better. So I started mentally scripting Dean's highlight reel of hypocrisy. Every smirk, every "I told you so" moment, every time he treated family like a networking event, it all lined up neatly like dominoes waiting for karma's gentle nudge. Dad's note, "Trust integrity, not inheritance," wasn't just a clue, it was a challenge. Maybe even permission. The next morning, I opened one of Dad's old photo albums for inspiration or self-torture, hard to say. There we were, two kids in matching flannel, holding the same fishing pole. Dean smiling directly at the camera, me looking at the line, actually doing the work. That photo summed up our existence. I always looked where the effort was. He always faced the applause. Flip the page. Family dinner. Thanksgiving '99. Dean raising a toast. Me half out of frame. Mom's eyes already halfway to the ceiling. I could practically hear his voice. "I'll handle it." The universal lie of eldest narcissists everywhere. The flashbacks kept coming in staccato rhythm. Dean, pretending to help Dad fix the boat while sneaking photos for Facebook memories. Dean, taking credit for repainting the cabin deck that I actually sanded. Dean, loudly announcing at reunions how he would inherit Dad's sense of leadership. Ironic, because the only leadership skill he had was delegating responsibility and hoarding credit. I remember one especially telling moment. We had a neighbor, old Mr. Halper, who collected tools like trophies. One summer, Dean borrowed his power drill and accidentally left it out in the rain. When Halper came asking, Dean told him I'd used it last. I tried to defend myself, but Dad just sighed and said, "Dean, take responsibility." Dean fake apologized so gracefully the man offered him cookies on the way out. Afterward, Dad quietly handed me $20 and said, "For your patience, son, you're gonna need it." Looking back, I realized Dad wasn't blind. He was waiting for the day Dean's charm would meet structure where performance couldn't rewrite the rules. That day had finally come, courtesy of a legal document with a built-in trapdoor labeled integrity. Still, a tiny part of me ached. Beneath the annoyance, there was guilt, because despite years of rivalry, he was still my brother. We shared jokes, secrets, late-night cereal raids. We just grew into different shapes of survival. I coped by staying small. He coped by staying shiny. But the older we got, the more that shine turned to rust. You can't build a life on applause. Eventually, the crowd leaves. And Dean, deep down, must have sensed it. That's why he clung so hard to control. The inheritance wasn't about money, it was about proving he still mattered more. I poured another cup of coffee and stared at Dad's note again. Trust integrity, not inheritance. 4 words that crackled with subtext. It wasn't directions, it was revelation. Somewhere between memory and mild caffeine overdose, clarity hit. This wasn't a puzzle to solve. It was a mirror. Dad had built a system where our own choices decided the outcome. Dean would hang himself on his own greed. All I had to do was stay out of his way and let him think he was winning. And suddenly, it was funny again. The whole situation felt like one of Dad's dry jokes. Set up, my sons inherit equally. Punchline, unless one's a jerk. I can almost hear him laughing about it in his quiet, understated way. So I put the photo album away, grabbed my keys, and decided to visit Dad's old study at the house. If there was any more of his mischief to uncover, I wanted front row seats. I texted Mom, just a simple stopping by to help organize Dad's desk. She replied with a heart emoji and be careful with his papers, they're emotional landmines. No argument there. As I drove over, the radio played some overly sentimental acoustic song about forgiveness. I snorted. Forgiveness could wait. Right now, I wanted observation. Because curiosity wasn't killing this cat, it was studying the post-mortem. Dad's study was still exactly as he'd left it. The faint smell of coffee and pencil shavings. The cluttered perfection of a man who organized chaos for comfort. I felt that familiar ache in my chest, but also this sharp little zing of intrigue. If Dad's ghost could rig emotional booby traps, this room would be the headquarters. And as I stepped closer to his desk, I spotted something under a stack of worn notebooks. The edge of what looked like a locked drawer key. That's when I smiled to myself. Dean may have inherited the spotlight, but I'd inherited the detective gene. And Dad? Turns out he'd left more than financial wisdom. He'd left breadcrumbs. And I was just getting started following them. Act 7, The Family Dinner Showdown. There's this heavy sort of anticipation you get before a big reveal, the kind magicians crave and guilty people dread. That's exactly what sat in my stomach as I walked toward Mom's house for Dean's family dinner. He'd sent invitations like we were attending a TED Talk titled How I Saved the Family Legacy. Even the font screamed overcompensation. When I arrived, I could already hear his voice bouncing through the dining room. "No, really, Mom. I just want harmony. I've put everything behind us." Translation: he'd spent the last 48 hours scrambling for explanations that made him look noble. The table was crowded. Cousins, aunts, one confused neighbor who thought it was a potluck. Mom looked brittle but peaceful, the way people do when they decide not to block incoming drama anymore. Dean stood at the head, wine glass in hand, posture screaming win. "Look who's here," he announced when I stepped in. "Our reluctant partner in closure." "Reluctant inspires curiosity," I said, hanging my coat. "How will I top that introduction?" "By smiling," he said through his perfect teeth. Everyone forced polite laughter. Even Aunt Linda tried, bless her soul. The air was thick enough to bug her. I took my seat across from him, the place card reading just my first name in good cursive, like it was a redemption on the crop. Dinner started fine, gourmet catering, soft jazz, and Dean narrating each course like a food critic for features in denial. "Dad loves good risotto," he cooed, spooning himself generous nostalgia. Mom nodded weakly. Halfway through the second glass of wine, Dean switched from charm to self-canonization. "It's been hard," he said, lowering his voice, carrying the logistical weight of the estate. "But that's what Dad would have wanted, leadership." I stabbed a piece of asparagus, or humility. He liked surprises too. Dean laughed the way insecure people do when they don't get the joke. Sure. He leaned forward. "Speaking of surprises, legal clears tomorrow. The assets should be officially aligned again." I smiled. Aligned's a strong word. He shrugged. Semantics. Everything's as it should be. His tone oozed confidence, but his eyes kept darting toward the door. I knew why. Patterson hadn't arrived yet. See, I'd invited the lawyer myself, told him the dinner would be the ideal stage for final clarifications. He agreed with the enthusiasm of someone about to watch a live comedy special. The meal chugged along, jokes, forced cheers, nostalgia reheated to lukewarm. Then just as dessert plates landed, tiramisu trembling slightly, footsteps echoed from the hallway. "Ah, Patterson," Mom said, half relieved. "You made it." Dean's fork paused midair. He turned slowly, like a man sensing an approaching audit. "Mr. Patterson, this is a surprise." Patterson smiled, that lawyer smile, polite, pitying, and faintly carnivorous. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I thought it best everyone hear the final estate resolution together." Dean coughed lightly. "We already discussed the summary." "True," Patterson said, producing that familiar folder from his briefcase. "But the confirmation documents required both parties present. Better clarity, same transparency." Every wine glass tilted forward in suspense. Even the neighbor leaned in for gossip nourishment. Dean waved dismissively. "No need to bore everyone. We trust the process, right?" "Absolutely," I said. "Especially the automated parts." Patterson adjusted his glasses. "As of this afternoon, clause enforcement has concluded." "Clause enforcement?" Aunt Linda repeated, delighted by the drama. Dean chuckled nervously. "Just terminology." Patterson continued. "When Mr. Dean initiated premature financial transfers, the conditional caveat outlined by your father took effect." You could feel the entire table inhale. Dean blinked. "Premature transfers?" Patterson slid a single envelope across to him. "Documented, signed, and time-stamped from your IP address. The will regards that as violation." Silence dropped like a curtain. Dean's jaw clenched. "That's impossible. It was administrative cleanup." "Of course." Patterson smiled thinly. "Intent doesn't void effect." Mom set down her fork very carefully. "What does this mean?" In practical terms, Patterson said, the estate, inclusive of all assets, reassigns entirely to your other child. Every gaze swung toward me. I wasn't even pretending to hide my expression anymore, a mixture of polite apology and smug inner fireworks. Dean's voice rose an octave. You can't be serious. That's theft. Patterson arched an eyebrow. Theft implies unlawfulness. This was moral math executed under legal instruction. A cousin snorted into her napkin. Dean stood abruptly, color flooding back into his cheeks in betrayal of logic. I acted out of efficiency. I sipped my water. Dad always said efficiency can be moral or criminal, depending on context. He glared at me. You planned this. I listened, said softly. Difference being only one of us heard the assignment. Mom exhaled shakily, equal parts stunned and relieved. So, it's settled. Finalized, Patterson confirmed, packing papers with the rhythm of the closing scene. Congratulations to our new sole beneficiary. Dean's laugh came out cracked. Great. The quiet one wins by default. Story of my life. Correction, I said. Story of Dad's legacy. That shut him up. Dinner dwindled after that. Dessert sweated itself into soup as conversation thinned into gossip whispers. Dean kept trying to salvage dignity, mumbling about temporary clerical mix-ups. Patterson exited discreetly, but not before giving me a micro-nod, the professional equivalent of a high five. Once jackets came on and goodbyes dribbled out, Dean cornered me near the doorway. His voice dropped low, desperate. You think this makes you better? I met his eyes. No, it makes me patient. There's a difference. Dad would hate this outcome. Dad wrote this outcome, I said. You just illustrated it. For a second, he looked deflated, like someone pulled the air from his ego and left only disbelief. Then came the predictable pivot. You'll regret rubbing this in. I won't need to, I said. You're doing fine on your own. He opened his mouth again, but Mom called softly, Dean, let it rest. Her tone didn't allow debate. The sight of her, not angry, just done, hit him harder than any argument I could make. Finally, he grabbed his coat, muttered something about lawyer errors, and stormed into the night. The front door shut with satisfying punctuation. Mom turned to me, exhaustion softening into quiet pride. You never raised your voice, she said. Dad said yellers lose structure, I replied. She smiled faintly and patted my arm. Guess he built systems that worked. After everyone left, I stayed behind to help clear dishes. The house felt expanded by silence, comfortable again. While rinsing glasses, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. For the first time in months, I looked rested. Outside, moonlight hit the driveway just enough to outline Dean's tire marks fading down the road. Maybe he'd come back one day when pride ran out and perspective kicked in. Or maybe not. Either way, the will had already distributed something better than property, clarity. As I grabbed my coat, Mom said, Your father always loved symmetry. I laughed. He'd appreciate tonight's layout, justice served between entree and dessert. She actually chuckled. Maybe now the family can breathe again. Walking to my car, I inhaled crisp night air that smelled faintly of victory and leftovers. My phone buzzed with a new message from Patterson. All transfers confirmed. Thank your father for the best assignment I've ever graded. I grinned, texting back, he always did favor practical lessons. Before driving off, I looked once more at the house. Lights dim, peace perched fragile but real. Dad's last test was over. The brother who wanted everything walked away empty. The quiet kid got the final word without saying much at all. Karma doesn't need applause. It just needs good lighting and a patient witness. Tonight, it had both. Act 8, Aftermath, and Karma Surf. The thing about karma is it doesn't send a calendar invite. It just shows up, quietly punctual, wearing satisfaction like perfume. The morning after the dinner showdown, I woke up to 14 missed calls from Dean, and one voicemail that started, look, this is ridiculous, and ended with, call me back or I'll but cut off before the threat could get creative. The universe was already shushing him. I brewed coffee, opened the curtains, and stood there watching sunlight hit the framed photo of Dad at the lake. He looked smugly proud, even frozen in 2 dimensions. "You were thorough," I muttered. "Overkill, but thorough." My phone buzzed again. Dean, texting like a telemarketer on commission. "We need to rethink this with a mediator." Then, "I can appeal." Then, the classic, "This isn't what Dad wanted." I typed a reply and deleted it 5 times before settling on the clause was Dad's idea. Talk to him about it. Unsurprisingly, silence followed. Hard to argue with ghosts. Next message came an hour later. "You're heartless." To which I cheerfully responded, "I inherited." No reply after that. Small victories taste best in pettiness portions. By noon, even Mom called checking if I'd heard from him. "He's not picking up," she said, half worried, half gleeful. "He'll surface," I said. Entitlement doesn't evaporate, it repackages. Sure enough, by evening Dean resurfaced, social media first, naturally. A post, "Family politics are the real inheritance." Black and white photo, tragic lighting, captioned like he'd written a manifesto. Comments flooded in with cousins posting supportive emojis, unaware they were reacting to self-inflicted irony. I scrolled through, chuckling softly. It wasn't cruelty, it was relief. For years, Dean had choreographed every family narrative. He was the golden son, the fixer, the storyteller spinning sympathy. Now the plot wrote itself and he didn't even own the pen. Over the next week, his texts shifted tone. Anger turned to bargaining. "Maybe we can share control? Then Mom's upset. Let's fix this together." Eventually guilt seeped in. Dad would hate seeing us divided. He'd hit every stage of grief except accountability. I replied sparingly, short, polite sentences. The kind that sting more than insults because they mean the argument's over. Meanwhile, life at the cabin changed. The first time I drove there after everything settled, I half expected Dean's car parked outside, but the gravel driveway sat perfectly empty. I unlocked the door and stepped in. The same creaks, same faint smell of pine and history. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sun like small applauding ghosts. Dad's fishing gear was still lined by the wall. I found myself running hand over the old rods, feeling equal parts nostalgia and forgiveness. It sneaks up on you, disguised as quiet. I poured coffee, sat on the porch, and let the lake do all the talking. Somewhere between those ripples and rustling trees, I started laughing slow, steady, uncontrollable. It finally sunk in. I hadn't outsmarted Dean. Dad had. I just learned the choreography. Phone buzz again, this time an email from Patterson. Subject, formal closure. The body simply read, "All assets transfer." Your father also left one private letter in safe deposit E23. Strongly suggest retrieval. So the man still had sequels. I drove to the bank next morning, half nervous, half curious. The clerk handed me a small envelope, sealed with Dad's unmistakable penmanship. Inside, a folded note in one cabin photo. The message read, "If you're reading this, you kept your calm. Thank you for proving kindness doesn't equal weakness. Remember, loyalty outlasts windfalls." Underneath, one last line. "P.S. Your brother needed humbling. You needed laughter. Call it even." I laughed right there in the bank lobby, earning concerned glances from a senior couple filling checks. "Sorry," I said, pocketing perspective in written form. Back at home, Dean kept oscillating between apology and veiled accusation. "You planned this," one message said. Then another, "Maybe I deserved it." That one stayed unread a while. Eventually I typed, "Dad left you more lessons than losses. Use one." Deleted it instead. Sometimes silence makes clearer points. Days became weeks, and the story gradually stopped being gossip fuel. Relatives moved on to weddings, divorces, trending diets. Dean sold off his car collection online, one post at a time, captioned things like simplifying life. Irony had officially become his brand. When Mom finally asked if I'd forgive him, I shrugged. "Already did," I said. "Doesn't mean I'll share bank accounts." We laughed, the easy kind you earn after storms. It felt good, normal, peaceful, sacred in its simplicity. Later that night, standing by the dock at the cabin, I took out Dad's photo again. The lake mirrored the moon perfectly, quiet enough that even thoughts had to whisper. "You were right," I said softly. "Greed shouts, loyalty lasts." Dean would figure that out eventually, the hard way, probably through another failed initiative. But his fall wasn't my satisfaction anymore. It was just a footnote to a well-graded life lesson. The real story ended here, with the porch light flickering warm, paperwork finally quiet, and me realizing Dad didn't divide wealth. He distributed wisdom. Fairly, poetically, maybe even cruelly comedic. I raised my mug toward the water. "To integrity," I whispered. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called back, fitting applause. Then my phone buzzed one last time, a short text from Dean. "I get it now. No excuses, no begging, just that." I stared at it through a long minute, smiling. Maybe he actually did. I typed back 2 words, "So did I." Hit send, turned off the phone, and let the night take it from there. The cabin stayed silent, loyal as ever. The only sound was the soft shuffle of wind threading through the trees, carrying away everything we didn't say. Act 9, the final twist. I thought that was the end of the story, Dad's lesson taught, justice served, and Dean humbled enough to qualify for a sequel titled Growth, maybe. But life apparently loves a bonus scene. A few months later, Patterson called. "We closed the estate officially," he said, "but one asset still requires your personal signature." I frowned. "Which one?" "The cabin," he said simply. "It was registered separately. Your father retitled it years before, under your sole name." I blinked. "Wait, so Dean never even had a claim?" "Not legally," Patterson said, and I swore I heard amusement hiding behind professionalism. "Your father kept that private. He said he trusted you to understand why someday." When the line clicked off, I sat there laughing until my ribs hurt. Dad hadn't just outmaneuvered greed, he'd persolved it. Dean had been fighting for crumbs from a pie he never baked. I drove to the cabin that weekend, the official papers in my glove compartment like a secret punchline. The air smelled sharper out there, like the world had washed itself clean of family drama. Inside, everything was exactly as we'd left it. The same old couch, framed fishing photo, and that drawer with extra batteries Dad hoarded like apocalypse currency. Standing in the middle of that small wooden paradise, I finally understood his design. He'd known Dean's weakness was spotlight addiction, so he built a test where showing off guaranteed loss. Simple, cruel, brilliant. As I unpacked groceries, because closure requires snacks, a pickup truck rolled down the road. Beige, dented, familiar. Dean's. He parked crooked, windows down, sunglasses hiding defeat. For a split second, I braced for round 2, but he just approached quietly, hands in pockets. "So," he said, staring at the lake, "you got it." "Technically, Dad gave it to me years ago," I said evenly. He nodded. No argument, no performance. Figures. Silence stretched between us, balanced by wind and water. For the first time in our lives, Dean didn't try to fill it. Finally, he said, "I sold the bins." Debt collectors were circling. I whistled low. "Bet they love a redemption arc." He shrugged. "Working part-time helpers now. Fixing tools." The irony is poetic. It almost cracked me, seeing him humbled, but functional, speaking like a person instead of a press release. "How's that going?" I asked. "Steady," he said, kicking gravel. "Boring. Kinda nice." We let that honesty breathe for a while. Then, because humor's my default survival mode, I gestured toward the cabin. "Want a tour?" Still has Dad's ghost in the Wi-Fi. He managed half a smile. "Nah. Just wanted to see it once, before the ownership vibes hit too hard." He started walking back to his truck, then paused. "You know, you played it well. Didn't gloat, didn't twist the knife." I raised an eyebrow. "Did you expect me to?" He smirked lightly. "Yeah. Then again, that's why he trusted you. That admission landed heavier than any apology could. I wanted to say something compassionate, but words diluted moments like this. So I just nodded. "Drive safe, Dean." He tapped the roof, muttered, "See you around," and disappeared down the road, dust trailing like punctuation. Watching him leave, I realized something. Revenge hadn't healed anything, but balance had. Dad hadn't pit us against each other. He'd let reality grade the essays. One passed with humility, one repeated the course. Later that evening, I made coffee and sat on the dock, documents beside me, sunset painting everything gold. For once, no anger, no thrill, just a quiet, expansive peace that stretched exactly the length of forgiveness. That's when I heard footsteps again. Not human ones, just the wind nudging a loose door frame. Still, I half smiled at the thought of Dad wandering ghost-like, enjoying his perfect finale. "You'd laugh at how neat this ending turned out," I said aloud. "Predictable, maybe, but earned." The lake responded with a soft ripple, as if agreeing. A week later, I was at the bank transferring final titles when guess who I bumped into? Dean, in line depositing a cashier's check. He noticed me, stiffened, then attempted humor. "Guess the moral wins again." "And guess it does," I said. He hesitated, then said, "Need a ride somewhere?" Gesture of civility, pride bleeding at the edges. I smiled. "Thanks, but I've got my own wheels now. Courtesy of the universe." He chuckled sadly. "Of course you do." He turned back to his teller window, and just like that, the story folded closed. 2 signatures, 1 lesson stamped in generational ink. Driving home, I rolled down the windows and let the cold air fill the silence Dad left behind. He'd warned us all our lives that greed ages fast, loyalty doesn't. Took 30-something years and one creative will for me to see he was right. When I reached the cabin again, I walked straight onto the dock, papers in one hand, small urn in the other. I'd picked it up from Mom earlier. Dad's ashes finally ready for their forever view. The lake shimmered calm, waiting. I opened the lid and whispered, "You passed your final 2, old man." Then let the ashes scatter into the wind, gray flecks spinning like applause. Watching them drift, I didn't feel triumphant, just grateful. Grateful that I learned from him before jealousy could teach by pain. Grateful that silence, my lifelong defense, ended up being my weapon. The last ember of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, cutting orange trails over the water. I whispered the line that had carried me since the funeral. Funny how the one who said I wasn't family ended up proving it. Then, nothing but water, wind, and that impossible calm. Morals, simple, really. Greed divides, loyalty endures. And sometimes the quiet kid who never fought back gets both justice and solitude in a single inheritance. So I packed up, locked the cabin, and left one light glowing inside. Dad's tradition for good luck. Let's close the door, but a beam hit the photo on the mantle, him holding 2 fish, a grin wide enough to rival the horizon. I smiled back. Lesson complete. Dad always knew who family was. The lake looked different that morning, brighter somehow, like it understood endings. I stood on the dock with Dad's old thermos in one hand and his ashes in the other, the air mild and forgiving. The last few months had rearranged everything, but right here, it felt still again. No more documents, no more legal acrobatics, just the kind of silence that feels earned. I poured a little coffee into the cap and set it beside me, Dad's version of communion. "You did it, old man," I said quietly. "You turned your will into a moral science experiment." A breeze rolled through, gentle but opinionated, ruffling the edge of the lake like laughter that traveled the surface. Behind me, the cabin stood exactly as we'd rebuilt it, simple, sturdy, and stubborn. Each plank carried layers of history, arguments, summers, campfire jokes, silent reconciliations. Every time I stepped inside, I half expected Dad to materialize beside the shelves, muttering about proper storage methods. Somehow, his absence still managed to supervise. I sat down on the dock, shoes off, feet skimming cold water. Reflection time. Dad always said wealth doesn't ruin people, it reveals them. Took me a while to understand how specific that statement was. Dean's drama wasn't just greed, it was need disguised as ambition. For years, he believed success proved love, while Dad believed love was the proof itself. Two definitions, one disappointment. When the inheritance storm started, I thought revenge would taste like payoff. But the real satisfaction wasn't the win. It was watching truth sort itself out without my interference. Turns out, patience is underrated revenge. You just let the wrongdoer narrate his own downfall, loud enough for applause. Mom visited last week. She walked the cabin, touched photos, and whispered. He balanced it perfectly. One son learned forgiveness, the other learned humility. I didn't correct her. It sounded too poetic to ruin. Before leaving, she hugged me longer than usual and said, "Your father always knew who family was." That sentence kept looping in my head like a refrain. Not family by blood or convenience, but by how we handle each other when the math doesn't favor us. Maybe that was the hidden curriculum behind every awkward barbecue and fishing trip. Loyalty doesn't announce itself, it just survives the audit. I stood, opened the small urn, and let the wind decide distribution. Gray flakes lifted, shimmered, and scattered over the lake's surface, instantly blending into the moving light. No music, no speeches, just the soft hiss of peace landing where noise used to live. It struck me how Dad's orchestration was never about punishment. He'd simply handed us mirrors, asked us to study what we saw. Dean saw entitlement until it cracked. I saw restraint until it transformed into strength. Both lessons cost exactly what they were worth. A loon called somewhere across the water, long and hollow, like a memory stretching its back after a long sleep. I took that as applause. I walked back to the cabin porch and leaned against the railing. From there, I could see the narrow road that led away toward town. The one Dean had driven down that day, pretending not to look back. Part of me hoped he would return someday, not for possessions, but for perspective. Maybe help repaint the porch, argue about proper fishing knots, laugh about everything that felt fatal once. Until then, this place stayed ours. His design, my stewardship. A monument, built not of inheritance, but intention. The sun climbed higher, turning the lake gold. I thought about all the people who'd written me during the chaos, friends saying, "You got lucky." Maybe, but luck is usually discipline disguised as timing. I didn't outsmart anyone, I just stopped giving discounts on my patience. I looked up and said, "You were right again, Dad. Greed divides, loyalty multiplies." Then I laughed because talking to ashes probably made me that eccentric lake person future neighbors warn their kids about. So be it. At least the fish listen. The porch light above the door flickered midday, a power glitch, or, knowing Dad, comedic timing from beyond. "Noted," I said. "You approve." I packed up the urn, washed the coffee lid in the sink, and wrote a small note I pinned to the freezer. "Gone fishing. Permanently okay." Something told me he'd appreciate that phrasing. Before locking up, I took one more look at the photo hanging by the window. The one of us standing side by side, holding fish bigger than our patience. My younger self looked tired but proud. Dad looked smugly meta, like he knew this moment would grow into metaphor. "Lesson learned," I whispered. "Next time, just leave instructions in plain English." Outside, the world had decided on spring. Everything smelled like beginnings pretending not to brag. Pine, wet soil, lake air with built-in forgiveness. I slid into my car, engine humming its low-key victory song, and watched the cabin shrink in the rear mirror. Somewhere along that curving road, I realized the inheritance hadn't made me richer. It had made me balanced. Dean got to reinvent himself. I got peace that didn't need announcement. Dad got exactly what he wanted. A family drama that ended in symmetry instead of lawsuits. By the time the town came into view, my phone buzzed with new messages. Some friend forwarding a video, someone posting another family reunion clip. Life rolling forward as if balance didn't just happen. I smiled, muted notifications, and let quiet narrate for once. People measure success in shares, but legacy works quieter. It shows up when you look at what's left and realize nothing feels missing. When I reached the highway turnoff, I slowed for a second, glanced at the sky, and spoke the final line out loud. Simple, fitting, automatic. Funny how the one who said I wasn't family ended up proving it. Maybe he heard me, maybe he didn't. But the echo felt like agreement. If there's a moral, and Dad would insist there is, it's this. Money invites greed, but time exposes loyalty. And if you ever need proof of both, just watch who stays calm when the reading of the will begins. The lake disappeared behind a bend, replaced by open road and possibility. Somewhere between goodbye and thank you, the story settled into its permanent chapter. Family, faith, and the strange comedy of justice playing fair.